In this video, I'll take you through the next steps to creating this page that we had started with the last video. So as you can see in the finished page here, I have a middle section to my page that consists of 3 columns, and the middle section is also center aligned and it's overlapping with the header just a little bit for a little extra style. So that's what I'm going to create in this video. The middle section also contains a heading and a paragraph. So let's get started. I want to insert my section right below the header. So to do that, I can try clicking in the design view right after the header. But as I notice in my code view, my blinking cursor is actually not after the header, but it's inside the header tag. So in the code view, I'm going to click after the closing header tag. So you can see my cursor is blinking after the header tag. Then I go up to Insert, and I'm going to use the standard tag called Section. So again, at insertion point is good because I placed my cursor after the closing header tag. For this case, I'm not going to assign any class or ID. I'll just click OK. So you can see the new section appears here. By default, when we add any new page element in Dreamweaver, it goes across the whole page. What I want for this section is, just like this header inner div, I want it to be 800 pixels wide and center aligned. That's easy to do with some CSS. So I'm going to click on this section, go over to my CSS designer, and add a selector for it. Dreamweaver creates a selector called body section. I'm going to remove the word body since I have only one section in this page. I don't need to be specific. Now I have a selector for section. I go up to Properties, Layout, set the width to 800 pixels, left margin to auto, right margin to auto. So my section now has a width of 800 pixels, same as my header inner, and then left margin and right margin that automatically adjusts as I resize my window. I'm going to go into the section and replace this placeholder text with, I'll also add a paragraph. Because I want this to be a paragraph, but this to be a level 2 heading. So with this text selected, I open up the Properties panel, and under Format, I choose Heading 2. Now you'll notice that the font for this is different from the font that I had set for my header. If I want all the fonts, all the text on my page to have the same font, there is a quick way that I can make this change. In my CSS designer, I can click on the body tag, which addresses the whole page body, then go up to typography, and under font family, I can choose this family. Now, as you see here, all the text on my page will now have the same font. Now, above the heading, I want to insert 3 columns. These columns are just divs. Just like I had inserted a header inner div, I'm going to insert 3 divs and assign them the same class, which is column. So again, I need to be careful where I put my cursor. Since I want these columns to appear at the beginning of my section, before the heading that says this is a section, I'm going to place my cursor right here. And then I go up to Insert, Div. At insertion point is fine because I placed my cursor carefully. I'm going to assign this div a class of column. Now remember, for this class to be assigned, if I click OK, there's a bug in Dreamweaver that does not assign the class properly. So instead of clicking OK, after I type the class name, I hit Enter on my keyboard. And then Dreamweaver inserts a placeholder saying content for class column goes here, and this is my column div. As you can see, the div stretches out across the whole space that's available to it. Now as you can see, this div is contained inside the section, so it'll only stretch as far as 800 pixels and no more. I'm going to change the width and add some spacing. If I go look at the finished page, I have 3 columns side by side with a little space around them. So I'm going to see what values worked there, and I'm just going to copy those values over. So in my finished page, I just go to my selector for column and look at my settings. So I had used a width of 30%, a height of 600 pixels, a left margin of 10 pixels, and a right margin of 5 pixels. I also have a bottom margin of 20 pixels so that after the columns I have a little space before my heading appears. So I'm going to copy all these values over one by one. So first I need a selector for class column. I have selected this div, and I can go and click the plus next to selectors. Dreamweaver adds dot column. Remember, the dot refers to a class. Now with this column selector, I'll just go and apply the values that I need. So after applying all these values, I have this as my column. I want 3 columns in my section, so I'm going to copy and paste this a couple of times. But first I'll just replace this text. Before I copy it, I also want to set the background color. So with my column selector chosen here in CSS, I go up to background and choose a light green background color. So you can see the background color appears. I'm going to copy and paste the code for this column so that it appears twice after this. To copy and paste this column properly, it's best to do it in the code view. So I'm going to scroll down to my code view. I want to copy this entire line because it contains the opening div. You notice opening div tag with the class, then the contents, and then the closing div tag. So if I copy everything from the opening div to the closing div, I've copied all the code for this column. Copy it, go to the next line and paste it, and then paste it once more. Now when I click up here in my design view, I have 3 columns. But you'll notice the columns don't sit side by side. They appear one below another. So how do I get these columns to sit side by side? This is where the CSS property called float comes in. By default, every page element you add will try to sit on its own line, in its own row, so to speak. So this column takes up this whole space, then the next column begins below it, and then the next column below it. If I want these 3 columns to sit side by side, there is one more property that I need to apply to the column class. This is the advantage of using a class. I have 3 column divs, but just by changing the property in the class, by setting the float property for the class, all 3 of them will get the same behavior. For any bunch of elements that behave the same way, we can use a class which makes it easier to style them. So in my CSS designer, I've selected the column selector. In my layout properties, I scroll down below margin, below padding, and more. There are float and clear properties. The float property allows us to line up page elements left to right or right to left. So for example, if I want these 3 columns to stack up left to right, I'm going to give the column class the property of float left. Watch what happens when I assign float left. So you can see now, just by adding float left, the three columns show up side by side. What float left is saying is that this column is going to be aligned to the left, and the space to the right of it is then available for any other floating elements. Since the second column also has the float left property, because it shares the same class, it comes and takes up some of the remaining space. And because this is floating, all of the available space to the right can be used by the next floating element. The third column also had the float left property, so it came in and occupied the space on the right. So with these three columns, the way I had sized them at 30% with a little bit of spacing, there was enough room for all three of them to sit side by side. So that's how the three columns are showing up next to each other in the same line. Now inside my columns, my text is sticking to the edge of the column, and I'd rather have some breathing room there. So to do this, I can add a little padding inside my column divs. And since all three of them share the same class, I'm going to apply it to the column class. So I have the column selector here. I go down to padding. I'm going to click the chain so that all four sides get the same padding value. And then I'm going to add 5px, that is 5 pixels of padding. Now, as you come here, you can see that the text has a little room around it, which makes it look much more pleasing and comfortable. So I have my section with three columns with a heading and a paragraph. The only thing remaining is I want to pull this section up a bit so that my columns overlap with the header a little bit. It makes it look more interesting. As you can see, the section sits right below the header. There's no space between them. But what I'm looking for is overlap, which is sort of like a negative space between them. So let me show you. If I click on the section selector and go up to the layout properties, in the margin, I can add a negative top margin to the section. A negative margin will actually pull it up instead of pushing it down. So it's going to pull my section up to create an overlap here. So I'll add a top margin of minus 60 pixels. And here you have it. Now my columns are overlapping with the header. So this completes my middle section. Let me save all and open this file in Chrome. So that's what it looks like. As I resize the window, now you can see what the left and right margins of auto mean. The auto margins automatically change so that the content in the center stays nicely aligned and centered. The columns sit side by side properly because the total of their widths and their margins and paddings comes out to less than 800 pixels. If my column widths, margins, and paddings added up to more than 800 pixels, then all three columns would not be able to sit in the same line. But with the float property, if you set your widths, margins, and paddings right, and the totals come out to be less than the containing box or containing section, then you can easily line things up and create quite nice layouts using the float property along with the width, margin, and padding. Remember that to get the float, margin, and padding to work properly, you must apply the width first. So always start with the width and then add the other properties to get the nice layout that you want to. In the next video, I will show you how to add the page footer and how to add the fixed position element at the top that doesn't scroll.